All right, we're starting. The King in Yellow by Robert W. Chambers. The King in Yellow is dedicated to my brother. Along the shore, the cloud waves break. The twin suns sink behind the lake. The shadows lengthen in Carcosa. Strange is the night where black stars rise, and strange moons circle through the skies. But stranger still is lost Carcosa. Songs that the Hyades so sing, or flap the tatters of the king, must die unheard in dim Carcosa. Song of my soul, my voice is dead. Die thou, unsung as tears unshed, shall dry and die in lost Carcosa. Casilda's song in The King in Yellow, Act 1, Scene 2. The Repair of Reputations. There is a line of French here that I'm going to open Google Translate for, and this translates to, let's not mock the mad. Their madness lasts longer than ours. That's the whole difference. All right, Termite. I already posted one, Soapy, in the announcements channel. You're good. All right, I'm starting. For real this time. Toward the end of the year of 1920, the government of the United States had practically completed the program adopted during the last months of President Winthrop's administration. The country was apparently tranquil. Everybody knew how the tariff and labor questions were settled. The war with Germany, incident in that country's seizures of the Samoan Islands, had left no visible scars upon the Republic, and the temporary occupation of Norfolk by the invading army had been forgotten in the joy of repeated naval victories and the subsequent ridiculous plight of General von Gartenlaub's forces in the state of New Jersey. The Cuban and Hawaiian investments had paid 100%, and the territory of Samoa was well worth its cost as a coaling station. The country, according to the Prussian system, had increased to 300,000 men, with a territorial reserve of 1,000,000, and 6 magnificent squadrons of cruisers and battleships patrolled the 6 stations of the navigable seas, leaving a steam reserve amply fitted to control home waters. The gentlemen from the West had last been constrained to acknowledge that a college or the training of the diplomats was as necessary as law schools are for the training of barristers. Barristers? I think that's how you spell it. Consequently, we were no longer represented abroad by incompetent patriots. The nation was prosperous. Chicago, for a moment paralyzed after a second Great Fire, had risen from its ruins, and white and imperial, and more beautiful than the white city had been built, or its plaything in 1893. Everywhere, good architecture was replacing bad and ugh. Yeah, this is gonna just be fucking 2 hours of me stumbling over words. I'm sorry. Everywhere, good architecture was replacing bad, and even in New York, a sudden craving for decency had swept away a great portion of the existing horrors. Streets had been widened, properly paved and lightened. Trees had been planted, squares laid out, elevated structures demolished, and underground roads built to replace them. The new government buildings and barracks were fine bits of architecture, and the long system of stone quays, which completely surrounded the island, had been turned into parks, which had proved a godsend to the population. The subsidizing of the state theater and state opera had brought its own reward. The United States National Academy of Design was much like European institutions of the same kind. Nobody envied the Secretary of Fine Arts, either his cabinet position or his portfolio. The Secretary of Forestry and Game Preservation had much easier time, thanks to the new system of national mounted police. We had profited well by the last treaties with France and England, the exclusion of foreign-born. Whoa! I'm not reading that word. I don't. Yeah, I guess this is from a different era, huh? The people reading along, you can see what word that is. I don't think that's appropriate to say. Well, it's appropriate, but I don't want to read it. Okay, back to it. The exclusion of foreign-born blanks as a measure of self-preservation. The settlement of the new independent. Whoa! Okay, well, we're doing that again. The settlement of new independent blank state of Swanee, the checking of immigration, the new laws concerning naturalization, and the gradual centralization of power in all of the executive all contributed to national calm and prosperity. When the government solved the Indian problem, and squadrons of Indian cavalry scouts in a native costume were substituted for the pitiable organizations tacked onto the tail skeletonized regiments by a former Secretary of War, the nation drew a long sigh of relief. When, after the colossal congress of religions, bigotry and tolerance were laid in their graves as kindness and charity began to draw warring sects together, many thought the millennium had arrived, at least in the New World, which, after all, is a world by itself. But self-preservation is the first law, and the United States said to look in on helpless sorrow as Germany, Italy, Spain, and Belgium writhed in the throes of anarchy, while Russia, watching from the Caucasus, stooped and bound them one by one. In the city of New York of 1899 was signalized by the dismantling of the elevated railroads. The summer of 1900 will live in the memories of New York people for many a cycle. The Dodge statue was removed in that year. In the following winter began that agitation for the repeal of laws prohibiting suicide, which bore its final fruit in the month of April 1920, when the first government lethal chamber was opened on the Washington Square. I'd walked down that day from Dr. Harcher's house on Madison Avenue, where I'd been a mere formality. Ever since that fall from my horse 4 years before, I'd been troubled at times with pains in the back of my head and neck, but now for months they had been absent, and the doctor sent me away that day, saying there was nothing more to be cured in me. It was hardly worth his fee to be told that. I knew that myself. Still, I did not grudge him the money. What I minded was the mistake which he made at first. When they picked me up from the pavement where I lay unconscious, and somebody mercifully sent a bullet through my horse's head, I was carried to Dr. Archer, and he, pronouncing my brain affected, placed me in his private asylum, where I was obliged to endure treatment for insanity. At last, I decided I was well, and I, knowing that my mind had always been sound as his, if not sounder, paid by tuition, as he jokingly called it, and left. I told him, smiling, that I would get even with him for his mistake, and he laughed heartily and asked me to call once in a while. I did so, hoping for a chance to even up accounts, but he gave me none, and I told him I would wait. The fall from my force had fortunately left no evil results. On the contrary, it changed my whole character for the better. From a lazy young man about town, I would become active, energetic, temperate, and above all else, ambitious. There was only one thing that which troubled me. I laughed at my own uneasiness, and yet it troubled me. During my convalescence, I had brought and read for the first time The King in Yellow. I remember after finishing the first act that it occurred to me that I had better stop. I started up and flung the book into the fireplace. The volume struck the barred grate and fell open onto the hearth in the firelight. If I had not caught a glimpse of the opening words in the second act, I should have never finished it. But as I stooped to pick it up, my eyes became riveted onto the open page. And with a cry of terror, or perhaps it was joy so poignant that I suffered in every nerve, I snatched the thing out of the coals and crept shaking to my bedroom, where I read and reread it, and I wept and laughed and trembled with a horror which at times assails me yet. This is the thing that troubles me, for I cannot forget Carcosa, where black stars hang in the heavens, where the shadows of men's thoughts lengthen in the afternoon, where the twin suns sink into the lake of Holly, and my mind will bear forever the memory of the pallid mask. I pray God will curse the writer, as the writer has cursed the world of this beautiful, stupendous creation. Terrible in its simplicity, irresistible in its truth, a world will now tremble before the King in Yellow. When the French government seized the translated copies that had just arrived in Paris, London, of course, became eager to read it. It is well known that the book spread like an infectious disease, from city to city, from continent to continent, borrowed out here, confiscated there, denounced by press and pulpit, censored by even the most advanced of literary anarchists. No definite principles have been violated in those wicked pages. No doctrine promulgated. Oh my God, that's a word. Promulgated, I think. No convictions outraged. It could not be judged by any known standard yet, although it has been acknowledged by the supreme note of art that struck in the King of Yellow. All felt that human nature could not bear the strain, nor thrive on its words in which the essence of purest poison lurked. The very banality and innocence of the first act only allowed the blow to fall afterwards with more awful effect. It was, I remember, the 13th day of April, 1920, that the first government lethal chamber was established on the south side of Washington Square, between Wooster Street and South Fifth Avenue. The block, which had formerly consisted of a lot of shabby old buildings used as cafes and restaurants for foreigners, had been acquired by the government in the winter of 1898. The French and Italian cafes and restaurants were torn down, the whole block was enclosed by a gilded iron railing, and converted into a lovely garden with lawns, flowers, and fountains. In the center of the garden stood a small white building, severely classical in architecture and surrounded by thickets of flowers. 6 Ionic columns supported the roof, and the single door was of bronze. A splendid marble group of the Fates stood before the door, and the work of a young American sculptor, Boris Yvain, who had died in Paris when only 23 years old. I looked over and I saw the fucking thumbnail. You can't just interrupt me like that. That's really good. Okay, I'm gonna take a drink really quick. No shit! Look out! Guys, you need to look the fuck out. The king in yellow is here. I already know that's fucking Proto-Anno, yeah. Alright, I will continue. The inauguration ceremonies were in progress as I crossed University Place and entered the square. I threaded my way through the silent throng of spectators, but I was stopped at 4th Street by a cordon of police. A regiment of the United States Lancers were drawn up in a hollow square around the lethal chamber. On a raised tribune facing Washington Park stood the governor of New York, and behind him were grouped the mayor of New York and Brooklyn, the inspector of general police, the commandant of the state troops, Colonel Livingston, military aide to the president of the United States, General Blount, commanding at the governor's island, Major General Hamilton, commanding of the garrison of the New York and Brooklyn, Admiral Buffby of the fleet in the North River, Surgeon General Lansford, the staff of the National Free Hospital, Senators Wise and Franklin of New York, and the Commissioner of Public Works. The tribune was surrounded by a squadron of hussars of the National Guard. The governor was finishing his ride to the short speech of the Surgeon General. I heard him say, "The laws prohibiting suicide and providing punishment for any attempt at self-destruction have been repealed. The government has seen fit to acknowledge the right of man to end an existence which may become intolerable to him through physical suffering or mental despair. It is believed that the community will be benefited by the removal of such people from their midst." Since the passage of this law, the number of suicides in the United States has not increased. Now, the government is determined to establish a lethal chamber in every city, town, and village in this country. It remains to be seen whether or not the class of human creatures who desponding ranks new victims for self-destruction fall daily will accept the relief thus provided. He paused and turned to the white lethal chamber. Silence in the street was absolute. There a painless death awaits him, who can no longer bear the sorrows of this life. If death is welcome, let him seek it there. Then quickly, turning to the military aide of the president's household, he said, "I declare the lethal chamber open," and again, facing the vast crowd, he cried in a clear voice, "Citizens of New York and the United States of America, through me the government declares the lethal chamber to be open." The solemn hush was broken by a sharp cry of command. The squadron of hussars filed after the governor's carriage. The lancers were wheeled and floored along the Fifth Avenue to wait for the commander of the garrison, and the mounted police followed them. I left the crowd to gape and stare at the white marble death chamber, and crossing South Fifth Avenue, I walked along the Leicester side of that thoroughfare to Bleecker Street. Then I turned the right and stopped before a dingy shop which bore the sign, Hauberk Armorer. I glanced in the doorway and saw Hauberk busy in the little shop at the end of the hall. He looked up and, catching sight of me, cried in his deep, hearty voice, "Come in, Mr. Castaigne." Constance, his daughter, rose to meet me as I crossed the threshold and held out her pretty hand, but I saw the blush of disappointment in her cheeks and knew that it was another Castaigne she had expected, my cousin Louis. I smiled at her confusion and I complimented her on this banner that she was embroidering from a colored plate. Old Hauberk sat, riveting the worn greaves of some ancient suit of armor, and the ting, ting, ting of his little hammer sounded pleasantly in the quaint shop. Presently he dropped his hammer and fussed about it for about a moment with a tiny wrench. The soft clash of the mail sent a thrill of pleasure through me. I love to hear the music of steel brushing against steel, the mellow shock of the mallet on thigh pieces, and the jingle of chain armor. That was the only reason I went to see Hauberk. He never interested me personally, nor did Constance, except for the fact of her being in love with Louis. This did occupy my attention, and sometimes even kept me awake at night. But I knew in my heart that all would come right, and I should arrange their futures I expected to arrange that of my kind doctor, John Archer. However, I should not have troubled myself about visiting them just then, had it not been, as I say, the music of the tinking hammer had for me the strong fascination. I would sit there for hours, listening and listening, and when a stray sunbeam struck the inlaid seal, the sensation it gave me was almost too keen to endure. My eyes would become fixed, dilating with a pleasure that stretched every nerve to point almost to breaking, until some movement of the old armor cut off the ray of sunlight. Then, still thrilling secretly, I leaned back and listened again to the sound of the polished rags, swish, 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 rubbing against the rust of the rivets. Constance works the embroidery over her knees, now and then pausing to examine more closely the pattern and the colored plate from the Metropolitan Museum. "Who's this for?" I asked. Albert explained that, in addition to the treasures of armor in the Metropolitan Museum, of which he had appointed armorer, he also had his charge of several collections belonging to rich amateurs. This was the missing greave of a famous suit which a client had traced to a little shop in Paris on the Quai. Whoa, that's a French word. Hey, you guys can look at the French word. Here you go. He, Hauberk, I negotiated and secured the greave, and now the suit was complete. He laid down his hammer and read me the history of the suit, traced since 1450 from owner to owner until it was acquired by Thomas Stainbridge. When a superb collection was sold, this client of Hallberg's bought the suit, and since the search for the missing greave had been pushed until it was, almost by accident, located in Paris. Did you continue the search so persistently without any certainty of the greave still being in existence? I demanded. Of course, he replied coolly. Then for the first time I took a personal interest in Hallberg. It was worth something to you, I ventured. No, he replied, laughing. My pleasure in finding it was my reward. Have you no ambition to be rich? I asked, smiling. My one ambition is to be the best armor in the world, he answered gravely. Constance asked me if I seen the ceremonies at the lethal chamber. She herself had noticed cavalry passing up Broadway that morning and wished to see the inauguration, but her father wanted the banner finished, and she had stayed to his request. Did you see your cousin, Mr. Castaigne, there? She asked, with the slightest tremor of her soft eyelashes. No, I replied carelessly. Lewis's regiment is maneuvering out in Westchester country. I rose and picked up my hat and cane. You going upstairs to see that lunatic again? Laughed old Hallberg. If Hallberg knew how I loathed that word lunatic, he would never use it in my presence. It arouses certain feelings within me which I do not care to explain. However, I answered him quietly. I think I shall drop in and see Mr. Wilde for a moment or two. Poor fellow, said Constance with a shake of the head. Must be hard to live alone, year after year, poor, crippled, and almost demented. It is very good of you, Mr. Castaigne, to visit him as often as you do. I think he's vicious, observed Hallberg, beginning again with his hammer. I listened to the golden tinkle on the greave plates, which when he had finished again, I replied, No, he is not vicious, nor in the least demented. His mind is a wonder chamber, from which he can extract treasures that you and I would give years of our lives to acquire. Hallberg laughed. I continued a little impatiently. He knows history as no one else can know it. Nothing, however trivial, escapes his search, and his memory is so absolute, so precise in details, that it were known in New York that such a man existed, the people cannot honor him enough. Nonsense, muttered Hallberg, searching on the floor for a fallen rivet. It is nonsense. Is it nonsense? I asked, managing to express what I felt. Is it nonsense that he says that the tassets and custards of the enameled suit of armor, commonly known as the princes emblazoned, can be found among a mass of rusty theatrical properties, broken stoves, and rag pickers' refuse in the garret in Pell Street? Hallberg's hammer fell to the ground, but he picked it up again and asked, with a great deal of calm, how I knew that the tassets and left custard. What the fuck is that word? Someone? Jesus, that is a word of all time. I don't know. We're missing from the princes emblazoned. I did not know until Mr. Wilde mentioned it to me the other day. They say they're in the garret of 998 Pell Street. Nonsense, he cried, but I only noticed his hand trembling under his leathern apron. Is this nonsense too? I asked pleasantly. Is it nonsense when Mr. Wilde continually speaks of you as the Marquis of Avonshire and Miss Constance? I did not finish, for Constance had startled to her feet with terror written on every feature. Hallberg looked at me and slowly smoothed his leathern apron. That is impossible, he observed. Mr. Wilde may know a great many things, about armor, for instance, and the princes emblazoned, I interposed, smiling. Yes, he continued slowly, about armor also, maybe, but he is wrong in regard to the Marquis of Avonshire, who, as you know, killed his wife's traducer years ago and went to Australia, where he did not long survive with his wife. Mr. Wilde is wrong, murmured Constance. Her lips were blanched, but her voice was sweet and calm. I'll disagree that, if you please, that in this one circumstance, Mr. Wilde is wrong, I said. This is the first one. I'm going to take a little break because there's a cut in the document here. It's like Act 2 or something. Wife mad. Kill wife. Yeah, the first one is a little hard to follow, I feel. But granted, this book is from 1895, so obviously, I mean, Quessard. Oh, okay, that's what Prodino said. All right, thank you. Oh yeah, no, for 1895, it's readable as shit. For 2025, it's like. Ooh. I mean, I do like this story. I have not read or I've not heard anything past like the fourth story, so. But shining armor and talking about suicide booths. Yeah, it's like from Futurama, dude. It's true. Remember that one time when Bart Simpson tried to kill himself in Futurama? All right, I'm going to continue. I'm gonna take a drink before I do, but I will continue. I climbed the three dilapidated flights of stairs, which I had so often climbed before, and knocked at a small door at the end of the corridor. Mr. Wilde opened the door, and I walked in. When he had double locked the door, pushed a heavy chest against it, he came in and sat down beside me, peering up into my face with his light-colored eyes. Half a dozen new scratches covered his nose and cheeks, and the silver wires which supported his artificial ears had become displaced. I thought I had never seen him so hideously fascinating. He had no ears. The artificial ones, which now stood at an angle from the fine wire, were his one weakness. They were made out of wax and painted a shell of pink, but the rest of his face was yellow. He might have better reveled in the luxury of some artificial fingers for his left hand, which was absolutely fingerless, but it seemed to cause him no inconvenience, and he was satisfied with his wax ears. He was very small, scarcely higher than a child of 10, but his arms were magnificently developed and his thighs thick as any athlete's. Still, the most remarkable thing about Mr. Wilde was that a man of his marvelous intelligence and his knowledge should have such a head. It was flat and pointed like the heads of many of those unfortunates whom imprisoned in the asylum for the weak-minded. Many called him insane, but I knew him to be as sane as I was. I do not deny that he was eccentric. The mania he had for keeping that cat and teasing her until she flew out of his face like a demon was certainly eccentric. I never could understand why he kept the creature, nor what pleasure he found in shutting himself up in this room with a surly, vicious beast. I remember once glancing up from the manuscript I was studying by the light of some tallow dips and seeing Mr. Wilde squatting motionless on his high chair, his eyes fairly blazing with excitement, while the cat, which had risen from her place before the stove, came creeping across the floor right at him. Before I could move, she flattened her belly to the ground, crouched, trembled, and sprang into his face, howling and foaming. They rolled over and over and over on the floor, scratching and clawing until the cat screamed and fled under the bed, and Mr. Wilde turned over on his back, his limbs contracting and curling up like the legs of a dying spider. He was eccentric. Mr. Wilde had climbed into his high chair, and after studying my face, picked up a dog's-eared ledger and opened it. Henry B. Matthews, he read, bookkeeper with the Wissott and Company, dealers in church ornaments, called April 3rd. Reputation damaged on the racetrack, known as a welcher. Reputation to be repaired by August 1st, retainer $5. He turned the pages, ran his fingerless knuckles down the closely written columns. P. Green Dusenberry, minister of the Gospel, Fair Beach, New Jersey. Reputation damaged in the Bowery. To be repaired as soon as possible. Retainer, $100. He coughed and added, called April 6th. Then you are not in need of any money, Mr. Wilde, I inquired. Listen, he coughed again. Mrs. C. Hamilton Chester of Chester Park, New York City, called April 7th. Reputation damaged at Dieppe, France. To be prepared by October 1st. Retainer $500. Note, C. Hamilton Chester, Captain USS Avalanche, ordered home from the South Sea Squadron October 1st. Well, I said, the profession of a repairer of reputations is lucrative. His colorless eyes sought mine. I only wanted to demonstrate that I was correct. You said it was impossible to succeed as a repairer of reputations, that even if I did succeed in certain cases, it would cost me more than I would gain by it. Today I have 500 men in my employ who are poorly paid, but who pursue the work with an enthusiasm which possibly may be born of fear. These men enter every shade and grade of society. Some even are pillars of the most exclusive social temples. Others are the prop and pride of the financial world. Still others hold this undisputed among the fancy and the talent. I choose them at my leisure from those who reply to my advertisements. It is easy enough, they are all cowards. I could treble the number of 20 days if I wished. So you see, those who have in keeping their reputations from their fellow citizens, I have in my pay. They may turn on you, I suggested. He rubbed his thumb over his cropped ear and adjusted the wax substitutes. I think not, he murmured thoughtfully. I seldom have to apply the whip, and then only once. Besides, they like their wages. How do you apply the whip? I demanded. His face for a moment was awful to look upon. His ears dwindled to a pair of green sparks. I invite them and come and have a little chat with me, he said in a soft voice. A knock on the door interrupted him, and his face resumed its amiable expression. Who is it? He inquired. Mr. Steylette was the answer. Come tomorrow, replied Mr. Wilde. Impossible, began the other, but was silenced by a short bark from Mr. Wilde. Come tomorrow, he repeated. We heard somebody move away from the door and turn the corner by the stairway. Who is that? I asked. Arnold Steylette, owner and editor-in-chief of the Great New York Daily. He drummed on the ledger with his fingerless hand, adding, I pay him very badly, but he thinks it is a good bargain. Arnold Steylette, I repeated, amazed. Yes, said Mr. Wilde with a satisfied cough. The cat, which had entered the room as he spoke, hesitated, up at him, and snarled. He climbed down from the chair and, squatting on the floor, took the creature into his arms and caressed her. The cat ceased snarling and presently began a loud purring, which seemed to increase in timbre as he stroked her. "Where are the notes?" I asked. He pointed to the table, and for the 100th time I picked up the bundle of manuscript entitled "The Imperial Dynasty of America." One by one I studied the well-worn pages, worn only by my own handling, and although I knew all from heart from the beginning, one from Carcosa, the High Aides Hastur and Aldebaran, to Castaigne, Louis de Calvados, my bad. To Castaigne, Louis de Calvados was born December 19th, 1877. I read with an eager, rapt attention, pausing to repeat parts of it out loud and dwelling especially on Hildred de Calvados, only son of Hildred Castaigne and what the fuck? These names are so fucked. I don't even know. Someone help me out here. Someone help me out here. Anybody? Edith? That's Edith? Okay, I guess the I. No I messed me up. My bad. All right. Edith Lands Castaigne, first in succession, etc., etc. When I finished, Mr. Wilde nodded and coughed. "Speaking of your legitimate ambition," he said, "how do Constance and Louis get along?" "She loves him," I replied simply. The cat on his knee turned suddenly, struck at his eyes, and he flung her off and climbed to the chair opposite to me. "And Dr. Archer, but that's a matter you can settle any time you wish," he added. "Yes," I replied. "Dr. Archer can wait, but it's time I saw my cousin Louis." "It is time," he repeated. Then he took from another ledger at the table and ran over the leaves rapidly. "We are now in communication with 10,000 men," he muttered. "We can count on 100,000 within the first 28 hours, and in 48 hours the state will rise en masse. The country follows the state, and the portion that will not, I meant California in the Northwest, might better never have been inhabited. I shall not send them the yellow sign." The blood rushed to my head, but I only answered, "A new broom sweeps clean." The ambition of Caesar and Napoleon pales before that which I could not result in seized in the minds of men and controlled on even their unborn thoughts," said Mr. Wilde. "You are speaking of the king in yellow," I groaned with a shudder. He is a king he is a king whom emperors have served." "I am content to serve him," I replied. Mr. Wilde sat, rubbing his ears with his crippled hand. "Perhaps Constance does not love him," he suggested. I started to reply, but a sudden burst of military music from the street below drowned my voice. The 20th Dragoon Regiment, formerly in garrison of Mount St. Vincent, were returning from the maneuvers in Westchester country to its new barracks on East Washington Square. It was my cousin's regiment. They were a fine lot of fellows in their pale blue, tight-fitting jackets, jaunty busbies, and white riding breeches with a double yellow stripe, into which their limbs seemed molded. Every other squadron was armed with lances from the metal points which fluttered yellow and white pennons. The band passed, playing the regimental march, and then came the colonel and staff, the horses crowding and trampling, their heads bobbed in unison, and the pennons fluttered in their lance points. Oh my god. Jeez. Some of these sentences trail on for so fucking long. I'm sorry that I... Okay. The troopers who rode with the beautiful English seat looked brown as berries from their bloodless campaign among the farms of Westchester, and the music of their sabers against the stirrups and the jingle of spurs and carbines was delightful to me. I saw Louis riding with his squadron. He was handsome as an officer. I had seen Mr. Wilde, who had mounted the chair by the window, saw him too, but said nothing. Louis turned and looked straight at Hallberg's shop as he passed, and I could see the flush on his brown cheeks. I think Constance must have been at the window. When the last troopers had clattered by and the last pennons vanished in the South Fifth Avenue, Mr. Wilde clambered out of his chair and dragged the chest away from the door. "Yes," he said, "it is time that you saw your cousin Louis." He unlocked the door, and I picked up my hat and stick and stepped into the corridor. The stairs were dark. Groping about, I set my foot on something soft, which snarled and spit. I aimed a murderous blow at the cat. But my cane shivered to splinters against the balustrade, and the beats scurried back into Mr. Wilde's room. Passing Hallberg's door again, I saw him at work on the armor, but I did not stop, and stepping into Bleecker Street, I followed to Worcester, skirting grounds of the Lethal Chamber and crossing Washington Park, went straight to my rooms in the Benedict. I think that's how you pronounce that, whatever. Oh, you said dick. Here I lunched comfortably, read the Herald and the Meteor, and finally went into the steel safe in my bedroom and set the time combination. The 3 3/4 minutes, which is necessary to wait while the time lock is opening, are golden moments. From the instant I set the combination To the moment I grasp the knobs and swing back the solid steel doors, I live in an ecstasy of expectation. Those moments must be like the moments passed in paradise. I know what I am to find at the end of the time limit. I know what the massive safe holds secured for me alone, and the exquisite pleasures waiting of hardly enhanced when the safe opens and I lift from its velvet crown a diadem of purest gold blazing with diamonds. I do this every day, and yet the joy of waiting and last touching it again, the diadem, only seems to increase as the days pass. It is a diadem fit for a king among kings, an emperor among emperors. The king in yellow might scorn it, but it shall be worn by his royal servant. I held it in my arms until the alarm in the safe rang harshly, and then tenderly, proudly, I replaced it and shut the steel doors. I walked back slowly to my study, which faces Washington Square, and leaned on the windowsill. The afternoon sun poured into my windows, and a gentle breeze stirred the branches of the elms and maples in the park, now covered with buds and tender foliage. A flock of pigeons circled about the tower of the memorial church, sometimes alighting on the purple tiled roof, sometimes wheeling downward to the lotus fountain in front of the marble arch. The gardeners were busy with flower beds around the fountain, and the freshly turned earth smelled sweet and spicy. A lawnmower, drawn by a fat white horse, clinked across the green sward, and watering carts poured showers of spray over the asphalt drives. Around the statue of Whoa. Stuyvesant, which had arrived in 1897, had replaced the monstrosity supposed to represent Garibaldi. Children played in the spring sunshine, and the nurse girls wheeled elaborate baby carriages with a reckless disregard for the pasty-faced occupants, which could probably be explained by the presence of half a dozen trim dragoon troopers languidly. Jesus Christ, man! Lolling on the benches. Through the trees, the Washington Memorial Arch glistened like silver in the sunshine, and beyond the eastern extremity of the square, the gray stone barracks of the dragoons and the white granite artillery stables were alive with color and motion. I looked at the lethal chamber on the corner of the square opposite. A few curious people still lingered about the gilt and iron railing, but inside of the grounds were the paths were deserted. I watched the fountains ripple and sparkle. The sparrows had already found this new bathing nook, and the basins were covered with dusty, feathered little things. Two or three white peacocks picked their way across the lawns, and a drab-colored pigeon sat so motionless on the arm of one. Oh my god, sorry. And a drab-colored pigeon sat so motionless on the arm of one of the fates that it seemed to be a part of the sculpted stone. As I was turning carelessly away, a slight commotion in the group of curious loiterers around the gates attracted my attention. A young man had entered and was advancing with nervous strides along the gravel path which leads to the bronze doors of the lethal chamber. He paused for a moment before the fates. As he raised his head to the three mysterious faces, the pigeon rose from a sculpted perch, circled around for a moment, and wheeled to the east. The young man had pressed his hands again to his face, and then with an undefiable gesture sprang up to the marble steps. The bronze doors closed behind him, and half an hour later, the loiterers slouched away, and the frightened pigeon returned to his perch in the arms of the fate. I put my hat on and went out to the park for a little walk before dinner. As I crossed the central driveway, a group of officers passed, and one of them called out, "Hello, Hildred," and came back to shake hands with me. It was my cousin Lewis, who stood smiling and tapping his spurred heels with his riding whip. "Just back from Westchester," he said. "Been doing whoa." Bucolic milk and curds, dairymaids and sunbonnets who say hey, and I don't think when you tell them they are pretty. I'm nearly dead for a square meal of Delmonico's. What's the news? There is none, I replied pleasantly. I saw your regiment coming in this morning. Did you? I didn't see you. Where were you? In Mr. Wilde's window. Oh, hell, he began impatiently. That man is stark mad. I don't understand why you saw how annoyed I felt by this outburst and begged my pardon. Really, old chap, I don't mean to run down a man like you, but for the life of me, I can't see what the deuce you find in the common with Mr. Wilde. He's not well bred, to put it generously. He is hideously deformed. His head is head of a criminally insane person. You know yourself that he's been in an asylum. So have I interrupted calmly. Lewis looked startled and confused for a moment, but recovered and slapped me heartily on the shoulder. You are completely cured, he began, but I stopped him again. I suppose that you mean I was simply acknowledged to never have been insane. Of course, that's what I meant, he laughed. I disliked his laugh because I knew it was forced, but I nodded gaily and asked him where he was going. Lewis was going. Looked after his brother officers who had now almost reached Broadway. We had intended to sample a Brunswick cocktail, but to tell you the truth, I was anxious to go and see Hallberg instead. Come along, I'll make you my excuse. We found old Hallberg, neatly attired in a fresh spring suit, standing at the door of his shop and sniffing the air. I just decided to take Constance for a little stroll before dinner, he replied to the impertinent folly of questions from Louis. Lewis, my bad. We thought of walking on the park terrace along the North River. At that moment, Constance appeared, grew pale and rosy by turns as Lewis bent over her small gloved fingers. I tried to excuse myself, alleging his engagement uptown, but Lewis and Constance would not listen, and I saw I was expected to remain and engage with old Hallberg's attention. After all, it'd just be as well if I kept my eyes on Lewis, I thought, and when they hailed a Spring Street horse car, I got in after them and took my seat beside the armorer. The beautiful line of parks and granite terraces overlooking the wharves of the North River, which were built in 1910 and finished in the autumn of 1917, had become one of the most popular promenades in the metropolis. They extended from the Battery of 190th Street, overlooking the noble river and affording a fine view of the Jersey Shore and the highlands opposite. Cafes and restaurants were scattered here and there among the trees, and twice a week military bands from the garrison played on the kiosks in the parapets. I think that's kiosks. Can someone confirm this for me? Is that kiosks? It looks like. Okay. I'm a little bit into the first story in the King in Yellow, so I will now continue. Someone can probably TLDR it for you. We sat down in the sunshine on the beach of the. We sat down in sunshine on the bench at the foot of the equestrian statue of General Sheridan. Constance tipped her sunshade to shield her eyes, and she and Lewis began murmuring a conversation which was impossible to catch. Old Hallberg, leaning in his ivory-headed cane, lighted an excellent cigar, the mate to which I politely refused, and smiled at vacancy. The sun hung low above the Staten Island woods, and the bay was dyed with golden hues reflected from sun-warmed sails of the shipping and harbor. Brigs, schooners, yachts, clumsy ferry boats, their decks swarming with people, railroad transports carrying lines of brown, blue, and white freight cars, stately and stone steamers, D-class tramp steamers, coasters, dredgers, scows, and every were pervading the entire bay, impudent little tugs puffing and whistling. My bad. Officiously, these were the craft boats which turned to the sunlight waters as far as the eye could reach. In calm contrast to the hurry of the sailing vessel and a steamer's silent fleet of white warships waved motionless in midstream. Constance merry laugh aroused me from my reverie. "What are you staring at?" she inquired. "Nothing, the fleet," I smiled. Then Lewis told us what the vessels were, pointing out each by its relative position to the old red fort in Governor's Island. "That little cigar-shaped thing is a torpedo boat," he explained. "There are four more lying close to each other. They are the Tarpon, the Falcon, the Seapox, and the Octopus. The gunboats are just above the Princeton, the Champlain, the Stillwater, and the Erie. Next to them lie the cruisers Farragut and Los Angeles, and above them the battleships California, Dakota, and the Washington, which is the flagship. There's two squatty-looking chunks of metal or." My bad, I was interrupted. I'm really quick on the mute, if you can tell. Anyways, where the fuck did I leave? Oh, there we go. Those two squatty-looking chunks of metal which are anchored there off Castle William are the double-turreted monitors, terrible and magnificent. Behind them lies the ram. Whoa! Osceola? Is that... anybody? What the fuck is that word? Osceola? Maybe? Anybody? I think it's Osceola. I would assume. Here, let me put it in Google Translate. It's right here. It is Osceola. Yeah, no, it is. I checked it. I checked it. It's Osceola. No, this is just how it is. It's like, fuck. Hopefully it doesn't get even harder from here, but I have a feeling that it will. Constance looked at him with deep approval in her beautiful eyes. "What loads of things you know for a soldier," she said, and we all joined in laugh, which followed. Presently, Lewis rose with a nod and offered his arm to Constance. They strolled away along the river wall. Hallberg watched them for a moment and then turned to me. "Mr. Wilde was right," he said. "I had found the missing tasses and left Cussard and the Princess Emblazoned in a vile old junk garret in Pell Street." 998, I inquired with a smile. "Yes." "Mr. Wilde is a very intelligent man," I observed. "I want to give him the credit of this most important discovery," continued Hallberg, "and I intend it shall be known that he is entitled to the fame of it." "He won't thank you for that," I answered sharply. "Please say nothing about it." "Do you know what it's worth?" said Hallberg. "No, $50, perhaps." "It is valued at 500, but the owner of the Princess Emblazoned will give $2,000 to the person who completes the suit. Our reward also belongs to Mr. Wilde." "He doesn't want it. He refuses it," I answered angrily. "What do you know about Mr. Wilde? He doesn't want them. He doesn't need the money. He is rich, or will be richer than any living man except myself. What will we care for? What will we care for money then? What will we care? He and I. When what?" demanded Hallberg, astonished. "You will see," I replied, on my guard again. He looked at me narrowly, much as Dr. Archer used to, and I knew he had thought I'd mentally unsound. Perhaps it was fortunate for him that he did not use the weird lunatic just then. No, I replied to his unspoken thought. I am not mentally weak. My mind is as healthy as Mr. Wilde's. I do not care to explain just yet what I have on hand, but as an investment which will pay more than mere gold, silver, and precious stones. It will secure the happiness and prosperity of a continent. Yes, a hemisphere. Oh, said Hawberk. And eventually, I continued more quietly, it will secure the happiness of the whole world. And incidentally, your own happiness and prosperity as well as Mr. Wilde's? Exactly, I smiled, but I could have throttled him for taking that tone. He looked at me in silence for a while and said very gently, "Why don't you give up your books and studies, Mr. Castaigne, and take a tramp among the mountains or somewhere or other? You used to be fond of fishing. Take a cast or two at the trout and the wranglies." "I don't care for fishing anymore," I answered without a shade of annoyance in my voice. "Used to be fond of everything," he continued. "Athletics, yachting, shooting, riding. I have never cared to ride since my fall," I said quietly. "Ah, yes, your fall," he repeated, looking away from me. I thought this nonsense had gone far enough, so I brought the conversation back to Mr. Wilde, but he was scanning my face again in a manner highly offensive to me. "Mr. Wilde," he repeated, "do you know what he did this afternoon? He came downstairs and nailed a sign over the hall door next to mine. It read, 'Mr. Wilde, repairer of reputations.' Third bell. Do you know what a repairer of reputations can be?" "I do," I replied, suppressing the rage within. "Oh," he said again. Louis and Constance came strolling by and stopped to ask if we would join them. Hallberg looked at his watch. At the same moment, a puff of smoke shot from the castmates of the Castle William, and the boom of the sunset gun rolled across the water, and it was re-echoed from the highlands opposite. The flag came running down from the flagpole. The bugles sounded on the white decks of the warships, and the first electric lights sparkled out from the Jersey shore. As I turned into the city with Hallberg, I had heard Constance murmur something to Lewis, in which I did not understand, but Lewis whispered "my darling" in reply, and again, walking ahead with Hallberg, through the square, I heard a murmur of "sweetheart" and my own Constance, and I knew the time had nearly arrived in which I should speak important matters to my cousin Lewis. All right, well, there's another break here, so you guys can take a small break. If you have any questions, I can try to answer them. Um, yeah, I think this story is in 1920. About Yeah, so from what I understand, all of these stories are relatively within the same time period. So, it's around like 1910, 1920. The story is about a cursed play, and it's like, oh, this is the evil play that kills you kind of thing. And the basic premise is that it takes grasp on people who read it. Um, this story is a little bit more on the pressing matter of it takes grasp on more mentally weak people, like the main character. This is what I understand. So, but here I can send you the Wikipedia page, which does a good enough job at explaining it. Here you go. So it predicted World War One in a sense because it mentioned a war with Germany. Is it referring to the Franco-Prussian War or something of the sorts? I would not know. I am not that type of history person. Don't really pay attention to that. So I would not know. This vexes me. Vexes is a good word. I think we should use it more. Here, let's see how much more I got. Okay, not very much. So this is like about the last chunk of the story before I'll take a longer break. I'm gonna sit here and eat this Heath bar that my mom handed me. Give him the vexing drug. So just out of curiosity, who is reading along with the document that I sent in server announcements? I tried to read along. I do read a little fast. Anybody have any complaints? Except for my horrible pronunciation of some words. Maybe a little slower. Do you think you should slow down? You'd stumble less? Yeah. Learn French. I don't want to do that. Well, if I wanted to learn French, I'd ask Jurits, but he's not online, so mostly listening to the background audio. Yeah, I can imagine. All right. The Heath bar is gone, and I'm sad. No, that's just how I say it, because the S and the J right next to each other are very confusing. Do gross. Yeah, I did add that one. That was me. Fuck. So I'm surprised that we have 17 people here like listening to this. That's kind of impressive. I think it's just it was his one of his usernames. So all right. Just he prestige player. There's a player. It's prestige 46. I'm leaving. Everybody got tired of listening to me talk about Skibbity Toilet, and they were like, "Holy shit, Vordhosbn is actually reading something I can understand." Fuck, I gotta tap in. All right, I will try to read slower. I'm really good at not reading slow because I have always read fast in my head, so that kind of just automatically translates to reading fast. So I will try my best. Otherwise, I will continue on the third. I guess this is the third act. So one morning early in May, I stood before the steel safe in my bedroom, trying on the golden jewel crown. The diamonds flashed fire as I turned to the mirror, and the heavy beaten gold burned like a halo about my head. I remember Camilla's agonized scream and the awful words echoing through the dim streets of Carcosa. They were the last lines in the first act, and I dared not think what followed. Dared not, even in the spring sunshine, there in my own room, surrounded with familiar objects, reassured by the... Oh my god, sorry. Reassured by the bustle from the street and the voices of the servants in the hallway outside. For those poisoned words had dropped slowly into my heart as death sweat drops upon a bedsheet is absorbed. Trembling, I put the diadem from my head and wiped my forehead. But but I thought of Hastur and my own rightful ambition, and I remembered Mr. Wilde where I had left him. His face all torn and bloody from the claws of the devil creature, and what he had said, at what he had said. The alarm bell in the safe began to whir harshly, and I knew that my time was up, but I would not heed it. And replacing the flashing circlet upon my head, as I turned defiantly in the mirror, I stood a long time absorbed in the changing expression of my own eyes. The mirror reflected a face which was like my own, but whiter, and so thin I hardly recognized it. And all the time I kept repeating between my clenched teeth, the day has come, the day has come. The alarm in the safe word and clamored, and the diamonds sparkled and flamed above my brow. I heard a door open, but I did not heed it. It was only when I saw two faces in the mirror. It was only when another face rose over my shoulder, and two eyes met mine. I wheeled like a flash, seizing a long knife from my dressing table, and my cousin sprang back very pale, crying, "Hildred, for God's sake!" Then as my hand fell, he said, "It is I, Lewis. Do you not know me?" I stood silent. I could not have spoken for my life. He walked up to me and took the knife out of my hand. "What is all of this?" he inquired in a gentle voice. "Are you ill?" "No," I replied, but I doubt if he heard me. "Come on, old fellow," he cried. "Take off that brass crown and toddle into the study. Are you going to a masquerade? What's all this theatrical tinsel anyways?" I'm glad he thought the crown was made of brass and paste, and yet I didn't like him any the better for thinking so. Let him take it from my hand, knowing it was best to humor him. He tossed the splendid diadem into the air, and catching it, turned to me and smiling. "It's dear at 50 cents," he said. "What's it for?" I did not answer, but took the circlet from his hands and placed it in the safe, shut the massive steel door. The arm ceased its infernal din at once. He watched me curiously, but did not seem to notice the sudden ceasing of the alarm. He did, however, speak of the safe as a biscuit box. Fearing lest he might examine the combination, I led the way into my study. Lewis threw himself onto the sofa and flicked at the flies with his eternal riding whip. He wore his fatigue uniform with a braided jacket and jauntry cap, and I noticed that his riding boots were all splashed with red mud. "Where have you been?" I inquired. "Jumping mud creeks in Jersey," he said. "I hadn't had time to change yet. I was rather in a hurry to see you. Haven't you got a glass of something? I'm dead tired. Been in the saddle 24 hours. I gave him some brandy from my medicinal store, which he drank with a grimace. Damned bad stuff, he observed. I'll give you an address where they sell brandy that is brandy. It's good enough for my needs, I said indifferently. I used to rub my chest with. He stared and flicked at another fly. See here, old fellow, he began. I've got something to suggest to you. It's 4 years now that you've shut yourself up here like an owl, never going anywhere, never taking any healthy exercise, never doing a damn thing but poring over those books up there on the mantelpiece. He glanced along the row of shelves. Napoleon, 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 he read. For heaven's sake, have you not nothing but Napoleons there? I wish they were bound in gold, I said. But wait, yes, there is another book, The King in Yellow. I looked at him steadily in the eye. Have you never read it? I asked. No, thank God, I don't want to be driven crazy. I saw he regretted his speech as soon as he uttered it. There is only one word which I loathe more than I do lunatic, and that word is crazy. But I controlled myself and asked why he thought The King in Yellow dangerous. Oh, I don't know, he said hastily. I only remember that the excitement that it created, the denunciations from the pulpit and press. I believe that the author shot himself after bringing forth this monstrosity, didn't he? Understand that he is still alive, I answered. That's probably true, he muttered. Bullets couldn't kill a fiend like that. It is a book of great truths, I said. Yes, he replied, of truths which send a man frantic and blast their lives. I don't care if the thing, as they say, the very supreme essence of art. It's a crime to have written it, and I, for one, shall never open its pages. Is that what you have come to tell me? I asked. No. I came to tell you that I am going to be married. I believe for a moment my heart ceased to beat, but I kept my eyes on his face. Yes, he continued, smiling happily, married to the sweetest girl on earth. Constance Hawberk, I said mechanically. How did you know? He cried, astonished. I didn't know it myself until that evening last April, where we strolled around to the embankment before dinner. When is it to be? I asked. It was to have been next September, but an hour ago a dispatch came from ordering our regiment to the Presidio San Francisco. We leave at noon tomorrow. Tomorrow, he repeated. Just think, Hildred, tomorrow I shall be the happiest fellow that ever drew breath in this jolly world, for Constance will go with me. I offered him my hand in congratulation. He seized and shook it like the good-natured fool he was, or pretended to be. I'm going to get my squadron as a wedding present, he rattled on, Captain and Miss Louis Castan, Hildred? Then he told me where it was to be and who were to be there, and made me promise to come and be best man. I set my teeth in listening to his boyish chatter without showing what I felt, but I was getting to the limit of my endurance, and when he jumped up and, switching his spurs until they jingled, said he must go. I did not detain him. There's one more thing I wanted to ask of you, I said quietly. Out with it, it's promised, he laughed. I want to meet you for a quarter of an hour's talk tonight. Of course, if you wish, he said, somewhat puzzled. Where? Anywhere, in the park there. What time, Hildred? Midnight. What in the name of, he began, but checked himself and laughingly assented. I watched him go down the stairs and hurry away, his saber banging at every stride. He turned into Bleecker Street, and I knew he was going to see Constance. I gave him 10 minutes to disappear, then followed in his footsteps, taking with me the jeweled crown and the silken robe embroidered with a yellow sign. When I turned out of Bleecker Street and entered the doorway which bore the sign, Mr. Wilde, Repairer of Reputations, third bell. I saw old Hawberk moving about in his shop, and I imagined I heard Constance's voice in the parlor, but I avoided them both and hurried up the trembling stairs to Mr. Wilde's apartment. I knocked and entered without ceremony. Mr. Wilde lay groaning on the floor, his face covered with blood, his face covered in blood, his clothes torn to shreds. Drops of blood were scattered all over the carpet, which had also been ripped and frayed with the evidently recent struggle. It's that cursed cat, he said, ceasing his groans and turning his colorless eyes to me. She attacked me while I was asleep. I believe she will kill me yet. This was too much, so I went into the kitchen and, seizing a hatchet from the pantry, started to find the infernal beast and settle her then and there. My search was fruitless, and after a while I gave it up and came back to find Mr. Wilde squatting on his high chair by the table. He'd washed his face and changed his clothes. The great furrows which the cat claws had plowed up in his face had been filled with collodion, and a rag hid the wound on his throat. I told him I should kill the cat when I came across her, but he only shook his head and turned to open the ledger before him. He read name after name of the people who had come to him in regard of their reputation, and the sums he had amassed were startling. I put the on the screws now and then, he explained. One day or another, some of these people will assassinate you, I insisted. Do you think so? He said, rubbing his mutilated ears. It was useless to argue with him, so I took down the manuscript entitled Imperial Dynasty of America for the last time I should ever take it down in Mr. Wilde's study. I read through it, thrilling and trembling with pleasure. When I had finished, Mr. Wilde took the manuscript and, turning to the dark passage which leads from his study to his bedchamber, called out in a loud voice, "Vance!" Then, for the first time, I noticed a man crouching there in the shadow. How I had overlooked him during my search for the cat, I cannot imagine. "Vance, come in," cried Mr. Wilde. The figure rose and crept towards us, and I shall never forget the face that he raised on mine as the light from the window illuminated it. "Vance, this is Mr. Castaigne," said Mr. Wilde. Before he had finished speaking, the man threw himself on the ground before the table, crying and gasping, "Oh God, oh my God, help me, forgive me. Oh, Mr. Castaigne, keep that man away. You cannot mean it. You are different. Save me. I am broken down, and I was in a madhouse, and now..." When it all was coming, I had forgotten the king in yellow, but I shall go mad again. I shall go mad. His voice died into a choking rattle, for Mr. Wilde had leapt onto him, and his right hand encircled the man's throat. When Vance fell in a heap on the floor, Mr. Wilde clambered nimbly into his chair again, and rubbing his mangled ears with the stump of his hand, turned to me and asked for the ledger. I reached it down from the shelf, and he opened it. After a moment searching among the beautifully written pages, he coughed complacently and pointed to the name Vance. "Vance," he read aloud. Osgood Oswald Vance." At the sound of his name, the man on the floor raised his head and turned to a convulsed face to Mr. Wilde. His eyes were injected with blood, his lips tumefied. "Called April 28th, continued Mr. Wilde. Occupation cashier in the Seaforth National Bank. He has served a term of forgery at Sing Sing, whence he was transferred to the asylum for the criminal insane. Pardoned by the governor of New York and discharged from the asylum January 19th, 1918. Reputation damaged at Sheepshead Bay. Rumors that he lives beyond his income. Reputation to be repaired at once. Retainer $1,500. Note, has embezzled sums amounting to $30,000 since March 20th, 1919. Excellent family and secured present position through uncle's influence. Father, president of Seaforth Bank." I looked at the man on the floor. "Get up, Vance," said Mr. Wilde in a gentle voice. Vance rose as if hypnotized. "He will do as we suggest now," observed Mr. Wilde, and opening the manuscript, he read the entire history of the Imperial Dynasty of America. Then, in a kind and soothing murmur, he ran over the important points with Vance, who stood like one stunned. His eyes were so bleak and vacant I imagined he had become half-witted. I remarked it to Mr. Wilde, who replied that it was of no consequence anyway. Very patiently, we pointed out to Vance that his share in the affair would be, and he seemed to understand after a while. Mr. Wilde explained the manuscript, using several volumes on heraldry to substantiate the result of the researches. He mentioned in the establishment of the dynasty in Carcosa the lakes which connected Hastur, Aldebaran, and the mystery of the Hyades. He spoke of Casilda and Camilla, and he sounded to the cloudy depths of the Demhi and the Lake of Holly. "The scalded tatters of the king in yellow must hide you till forever," he muttered, but I do not believe Vance heard him. Then by degrees he led Vance along the ramifications of the imperial family to... Whoa. That's even more confusing of a word. Anybody? I... Anybody? Anybody got any ideas there? What the... No, that is... It's a name. Here, I can give you, like, the passage. Like, the small, like, sentence that it's used in. How the fuck do you pronounce this? Okay. Alright. How do I... Okay, you know what? We're just gonna skip over that word. To Blankenthale, to Neotalba and the Phantom of Truth to Aldones, and then tossing aside the manuscript and notes, he began the wonderful story of the last king. Fascinated and thrilled, I watched him. He threw up his head, his long arms were stretched out in a magnificent gesture of pride and power, and his eyes blazed deep in their sockets like two emeralds. Vance listened stupefied. As for me, at last when Mr. Wilde had finished and pointing to me cried, "The cousin of the king!" my head swam with excitement. Controlling myself with a superhuman effort, I explained to Vance why I alone was worthy of the crown and why my cousin should be exiled or die. I made him understand that my cousin must never marry, even after renouncing all of his claims, and how, least of all, he should marry the daughter of the Marquis of Avonshire and bring England into the question. I showed him a list of 1,000 names which Wilde had drawn up. Every man whose name was there had received the yellow sign which no living human had dared disregard. The city, the state, the whole land were ready to rise and tremble before the pallid mask. The time had come, the people should know of the son of Hastur, and the whole world should bow to the black stars which hang over the sky over Carcosa. Vance leaned on the table, his head buried in his hands. Mr. Wilde drew a rough sketch of the margin of yesterday's Herald with a bit of lead pencil. It was a plan of Hawberk's rooms. Then he wrote out the order and affixed the seal, and shaking like a palsied man, I signed my first writ of execution with my name, Hildred Rex. Oh my god, I'm stuffy right now. Winter has come, and my nose is not enjoying it. Alright. Continuing. Mr. Wilde clambered to the floor and, locking the cabinet, took a long square box from the first shelf. This he brought to the table and opened. A new knife lay in the tissue paper inside, and I picked it up and handed it to Vance, along with the order and the plan of Hawberk's apartment. Then Mr. Wilde told Vance that he could go, and when he went, shambling like an outcast of the slums. I sat for a while watching the daylight fade of the square tower of the Judson Memorial Church, and finally, gathering up the manuscript and notes, took my hat and started for the door. Mr. Wilde watched me in silence. When I had reached the hall, I looked back, and Mr. Wilde's small. When I looked back, Mr. Wilde's small eyes were still fixed on me. Behind him, the shadows gathered in the fading light. Then I closed the door behind me and went out into the darkening streets. I'd eaten nothing since breakfast, but I was not hungry. A wretched, half-starved creature who stood looking across the street at the lethal chamber noticed me and came up to tell me a tale of misery. I gave him money. I don't know why, and he went away without even thanking me. An hour later, another outcast approached and whined his story. I had a blank bit of paper in my pocket on which was traced the yellow sign, and I handed it to him. He looked at it stupidly for a moment, and then with an uncertain glance to me, folded it with what seemed to be exaggerated care and placed it in his bosom. The electric lights were sparkling among the trees, and the new moon shone in the sky above the lethal chamber. It was tiresome waiting in the square. I wandered from the marble arch to the artillery stables and back again to the lotus fountains. I think that's how you say that. The flowers in the grass exhaled a fragrance which troubled me. The jet of the fountain played in the moonlight, and the musical splash of falling drops reminded me of the tinkle of chained metal in Hawberk's shop. But it was not so fascinating, and the dull sparkle of the moonlight and the water brought no such sensations of exquisite pleasure as when the sunshine played over the polished steel of a corselet on Hawberk's knee. I watched the bat starting and turning above the water plants in the fountain basin, but the rapid, jerky flight set my nerves on edge, and I went away again to walk aimlessly to and fro among the trees. The artillery stables were dark, but in the cavalry barracks the officers' windows were brilliantly lighted, and the sally port was constantly filled with troopers in fatigue, carrying straw and harness and baskets filled with tin dishes. Twice the mounted sentry at the gates was changed while I wandered up and down the asphalt walk. I looked at my watch. It was nearly time. The lights in the barracks went out one by one, and the barred gate was closed, and every minute or two an officer passed and through the side wicket, leaving a rattle of accoutrements and a jingle of spurs out in the night air. The square had become very silent. The last homeless loiterer had been driven away by the gray-coated park policeman. The cars tracked along Worcester Street were deserted, and the only sound which broke the stillness of the stamping was the sentry's horse and the ring of his saber against the saddle pommel. In the barracks, the officers' quarters were still lighted, and military servants passed and repassed before the bay windows. 12 o'clock sounded from the new spire in St. Francis Xavier, and at the last stroke of the sad-toned bell, a figure passed through the wicket beside the portcullis. I think so. Returned to the sluice of the sentry, and crossing the street, entered the square, and advanced towards the Benedict apartment house. Lewis, I called. The man pivoted on the spurred heels and came straight towards me. Is that you, Hildred? Yes, you are on time. I took his offered hand, and we strolled towards the lethal chamber. He rattled on and on about his wedding and the graces of Constance and their future prospects, calling my attention to his captain's soldier straps, the triple gold arabesque on his sleeve and fatigue cap. I believe I listened to as much of the music of his spurs as the saber as I did to his boyish babble, and at last we stood under the elms of the 4th Street corner of the square opposite to the lethal chamber. Blah, 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 blah. Then he laughed and asked me what I wanted with him. I motioned him to a seat on a bench under the electric light and sat down beside him. He looked at me curiously with that same searching glance which I'd hate and fear in doctors. I felt the insult of his look, but he did not know it, and I carefully concealed my feelings. Well, old chap, he inquired, what can I do for you? I drew from my pocket the manuscripts and notes of the Imperial Dynasty of America, and looking him in the eye, said, I will tell you. On your word as a soldier, promise me to read this manuscript from beginning to end, without asking me a question. Promise me to read these notes in the same way, and promise me to listen to what I have to tell you, what I have to tell later. I promise if you wish it, he said pleasantly. Give me the paper, Hildred. He began to read, raising his eyebrows with a puzzled, whimsical air which made me tremble with suppressed anger. As he advanced, his eyebrows contracted, and his lips seemed to form the word rubbish. Then he looked slightly bored, but apparently for my sake read, with an attempted interest which presently ceased to be an effort. He started when the closely written pages he came to his own name, and when he came to mine, he lowered the pages, looked sharply at me for a moment, but he kept his word and resumed his reading. And I let the half-formed questions die on his lip unanswered. When he came to the end and read the signature of Mr. Wilde, he folded the paper carefully and returned it to me. I handed him the notes, and he settled back, pushing his fatigue cap up to his forehead with a boyish gesture, which I had remembered so well in school. I watched his face as he read, and when I finished, I took the notes of the manuscript and placed them in my pocket, then unfolded a scroll marked with the yellow sign. He saw the sign, but he did not seem to recognize it, and I called his attention to it somewhat sharply. "Well," he said, "I see it. What is it?" "It is the yellow sign," I said angrily. "Oh, that's it. Is it?" Said Lewis in that flattering voice was Dr. Archer used to employ with me, and would probably have employed again had I not settled his affair for him. I kept my rage down and answered as steadily as possible. "Listen, you have engaged your word?" "I am listening, old chap," he replied soothingly. I began to speak very calmly. Dr. Archer, having by some means become possessed of the secret of the imperial succession, attempted to deprive me of my right, alleging that because of a fall from my horse 4 years ago, I had become mentally deficient. He presumed to place me under restraint in his own house in hopes of either driving me insane or poisoning me. I have not forgotten it. I visited him last night, and the interview was final. Lewis turned quite pale, but he did not move. I resumed triumphantly. "There are yet 3 people to be interviewed within the interests of Mr. Wilde and myself. They are my cousin Lewis, Mr. Hawberk, and his daughter Constance." Lewis sprang to his feet, and I rose also and flung the paper marked with the yellow sign to the ground. "Oh, I don't need to tell you. Oh, I don't need that to tell you that I say." That's a fuck-ass sentence, my bad. "Oh, I don't need to tell you that what I have to say," I cried, with a laugh of triumph. "You must renounce the crown to me, or do you hear? To me." Lewis looked at me with a startled air, but recovered himself and said kindly, "Of course, I renounce what is it that I must renounce?" "The crown," I said angrily. "Of course," he answered, "I renounce it. Come, old chap, I'll walk back to your rooms with you." "Don't try any of your doctor's tricks on me," I cried, trembling with fury. "Don't act as if you think I am insane." "What nonsense," he replied. "Come, it's getting late, Hildred." "No," I shouted. "You must listen. You cannot marry. I forbid it. Do you hear? I forbid it. You shall renounce the crown, and in reward I grant you exile, but if you refuse, you shall die." He tried to calm me, but I was roused at last, and drawing my long knife, barred his way. Then I told him how they would find Dr. Archer in the cellar with his throat open, and I laughed in his face, but I thought of Fance and his knife, and the order signed by me. "Ah, but you are the king," I cried, "but I shall be king. Who are you to keep me from the empire over the habitable earth? I was born the cousin of the king, but I shall be king." Lewis stood white and rigid before me. Suddenly a man came running up Fourth Street, entered the gate of the lethal temple, traversed the path to the bronze door at full speed, and plunged into the death chamber with the cry of one demented, and I laughed until I wept tears, for I had recognized Vance. I knew that Hawberk and his daughter were no longer in my way. "Go," I cried to Lewis. "You have ceased to be a menace. You will never marry Constance now, and if you marry anyone else in your exile, I will visit you as I did at my doctor last night. Mr. Wilde takes charge of you tomorrow." Then I turned and darted down into South Fifth Avenue with a cry of terror. Lewis dropped his belt and saber and followed me like the wind. I heard him close behind me at the corner of Bleecker Street, and I dashed into the door under Hawberk's sign. He cried, "Halt, or I fire," but when he saw I flew up the stairs, leaving Hawberk's shop below, he left me, and I heard him hammering and shouting at their door as though if it were possible to rouse the dead. Oh my god. Blah, 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 blah. He does keep getting rage baited. Okay, hold on. I need to just finish this really quick. Mr. Wilde's door was open, and I entered crying. "It is done! It is done! Let the nations rise and look upon their king!" But I could not find Mr. Wilde. So I went to my cabinet and took the splendid diadem from its case. Then I drew on the white silk robe embroidered with the yellow sign and placed the crown upon my head. At last I was king by my right and Hastur, king because I knew the mystery of the Hyades, and my mind had sounded the depths of the lake of Holly. I was king. The first gray pencilings of dawn would raise a tempest that would shake 2 hemispheres, and as I stood, my every nerve pinched to the highest tension. Faint with the joy and splendor of my thought, in the dark passage a man groaned. I seized the tallow dip and sprang to the door. The cat passed me like a demon, and the tallow dip went out, but my long knife flew swifter than she, and I heard her screech, and I knew that my knife had found her. For a moment, I listened to her tumbling and thumping about in the darkness, and then when her frenzy ceased, I lighted a lamp and raised it over my head. Mr. Wilde lay on the floor with his throat torn open. At first, I thought he was dead, but as I looked, a green sparkle came from his sunken eyes. His mutilated hand trembled, and then a spasm stretched his mouth from ear to ear. For a moment, my terror and despair gave place to hope, but as I bent over him, his eyeballs rolled clean around in his head, and he had died. Then, when I stood transfixed with rage and despair, seeing my crown, my empire, every hope and ambition, my very life laying prostrate there with the dead matter, they came. They seized me from behind and bound me until my veins stood like cords, and my voice failed with the paroxysms of frenzied screams. But I still raged, bleeding and infuriating among them, and more than one policeman felt my sharp teeth. Then, when I could no longer move, they came nearer. I saw old Hallberg, and behind them my cousin Louis, ghastly faced, and farther away in the corner, a woman, Constance, weeping softly. "Ah, I see it now," I shrieked. "You have seized the throne in the empire. Woe, woe to you who are crowned with the crown of the king in yellow." Editor's note: Mr. Castaigne died yesterday in the asylum for criminal insane. That's it. That's the end of the story. So that was the first story, obviously. Could you guys tell he was basically fucking cuckoo? Oh, Termite King 9 has come to speak up.
What the fuck happened in that story?
From what I can understand, this dude's insane.
Well, yeah, I kind of gathered that part. I kind of gathered. So he was the cousin of the king, and he went to this guy that repairs people's reputations. And there's like cat. That seems to be kind of a recurring thing. I don't know that there's much.
Yeah, he owns the cat.
To that one. And then he has like an insane guy that works for him, and then he threatened the other guy, the other cousin, the other heir of the king, with a knife. That was the story. That was really
So he thought
there
that he was gonna be the king in yellow or whatever, and he thought he was gonna control the imperial dynasty of America because Mr. Wilde said so. And I think you can see that. I got this from the Wendigoon video, but Wendigoon implies that both Vance and Hildred are, insane. Because you can tell Vance is, fucking, he's lost it, basically.
Yeah.
And he's preying on mentally ill people, kind of like how the King in Yellow already preys. So it's like a vessel of the King in Yellow is preying on, So I think he's just kind of insane, and he thinks he will become the king of whatever. But that is what I can get from the story.
I thought he was in the right. I thought he was a hero. I thought he was like the good guy in the story. Like I supported what he did. Gearsians, leave your viewpoint. Like, who do you agree? Is he a bad guy or like a local hero?
Is he a bad guy? Is he a bad guy? Yeah, true. Is he some sort of like? He's an anti-hero like Walter White? An anti-villain? I think he was a neutral guy. I like what Average Snail said. Am I the asshole for killing a cat because my cousin made me look like a soy boy in front of his fiance?
True.
Everyone in the story sounds a little more than a little crazy, so I wouldn't know. I think he was just fucking insane. So, have I got you slightly invested, Termite King 9? From my rancid ramblings?
That sure was the story of all time right there, where that was...
Dude, we got like 6 more, bro. Here, wait. Okay, we're on 1.
That's great, buddy.
Okay, that was story number 1. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 more. So, only like 4 are about the King in Yellow. Alright, well, we have 3 left, so. Fuck the other 6. I don't care about them. So, I guess I'm just gonna read the first 4. This is like level 1 esotericism. You better be invested, Termite King 9. Oh shit, you heard Proto-Anno.
There you have it.
Yeah, there you have it, bud. I'm gonna take a little like quote unquote lap because I have food in front of me and I'm hungry, so I don't know, you guys can talk about it. Just for the people out in the audience, 56 kilobytes. Hey, Soapy, can you kill Solexis? What if I already? Everybody would be laughing so hard that they wouldn't understand this story because you're just using the TTS voice. You're using the TikTok voice. You brines, Alexis. Foul for narrator. All right. Okay. You know what? I'll encourage this. If we get 10 votes on foul for narrator, on the 10 thumbs up on the foul for narrator, I'll let him narrate for the story. I need 10. I'll give you until 9:13. I'll give you 2 minutes. 7, 8, 9. There's one more. You need one more to make this happen, guys. Okay, it's at 10. Oh, it's back to 9. Back to 10. Okay, is it hovering at... Okay, it's at 11. All right, Foul. You can come on up. All right. All right, this is all you, man. So
The mask.
All right, I'm stepping down. This is all you. This is
Camilla,
all fucking you, good luck.
Sir, should unmask. Stranger, indeed, Casilda, indeed it's time. We all have laid aside disguise, but you, stranger, I wear no mask. Camilla, terrified, aside to Casilda. No mask, no mask. Although I knew nothing of chemistry, I listened fascinated. He picked up an Easter lily which Genevieve had brought that morning from Notre Dame and dropped it into the basin. Instantly, the liquid lost its crystalline clearness. For a second, the lily was enveloped in a milk-white foam, which disappeared, leaving the fluid opalescent. Changing tints of orange and crimson played over the surface, and then what seemed to be a ray of pure sunlight struck through from the bottom where the lily was resting. At the same instant, he plunged his hand into the basin and drew out the flower. There is no danger, he explained, if you choose the right moment. That golden ray is the signal. He held the lily toward me, and I took it in my hand. It had turned to stone, to the purest marble. You see, he said, it is without a flaw. What sculptor could reproduce it? The marble was white as snow, but in its depths the veins of the lily were tinged with palest azure, and a faint flush lingered deep in its heart. Don't ask me the reason of that, he smiled, noticing my wonder. I have no idea why the veins and heart are tinted, but they always are. Yesterday I tried one of Genevieve's goldfish. There it is. The fish looked as if sculptured in marble, but if you held it to the light, the stone was beautifully veined with a faint blue, and from somewhere within came a rosy light like the tint which slumbers in an opal. I looked into the basin. Once more it seemed filled with clearest crystal. If I should touch it now, I demanded. I don't know, he replied, but you had better not try. There is one thing I'm curious about, I said, and that is where the ray of sunlight came from. It looked like a sunbeam, true enough, he said. I don't know. It always comes when I immerse any living thing. Perhaps, he continued, smiling, perhaps it is the vital spark of the creature escaping to the source from whence it came. I saw he was mocking and threatened him with a maho stick, but he only laughed and changed the subject. Stay till lunch. Genevieve will be here directly. I saw her going to early mass. Do you think I destroyed it? Back on the sofa, Boris gravely, twirling a sculptor's destroyed, squinting at his work. How can we tell? We sat in the corner of a studio near his unfinished group of the Fates. He leaned back on the sofa, twirling a sculptor's chisel and squinting at his work. By the way, he said, I have finished pointing up that old academic Ariadne, and I suppose it will have to go to the salon. It's all I have ready this year, but after the success the Madonna brought me, I feel ashamed to send a thing like that. The Madonna, an exquisite marble for which Genevieve had sat, had been the sensation of last year's salon. I looked at the Ariadne. It was a magnificent piece of technical work, but I agreed with Boris that the world would expect something better of him than that. Still, it was impossible now to think of finishing in time for the salon. That splendid, terrible group half-shrouded in the marble behind me. The Fates would have to wait. We were proud of Boris Yvain. We claimed him, and he claimed us on the strength of his having been born in America, although his father was French and his mother was a Russian. Everyone in the Beaux-Arts called him Boris. And yet there were only two of us whom he addressed in the same familiar way, Jack Scott and myself. Perhaps my being in love with Genevieve had something to do with his affection for me. Not that it had ever been acknowledged between us. But after all was settled, and she had told me with tears in her eyes that it was Boris whom she loved, I went over to his house and congratulated him. The perfect cordiality of that interview did not deceive either of us. I always believed, although to one at least it was a great comfort. I do not think he and Genevieve ever spoke of the matter together, but Boris knew. Genevieve was lovely. The Madonna-like purity of her face might have been inspired by the Sanctus in Gounod's Mass, but I was always glad when she changed that mood for what we called her April menus. She was often as variable as an April day. In the morning grave, dignified and sweet, at noon laughing, capricious, at evening whatever one least expected. I preferred her so rather than in that Madonna-like tranquility which stirred the depths of my heart. I was dreaming of Genevieve when he spoke again. What do you think of my discovery, Alec? I think it wonderful. I shall make no use of it, beyond satisfying my own curiosity so far as may be, and the secret will die with me. It would be rather a blow to sculpture, would it not? We painters lose more than we ever gain by photography. Boris nodded, playing with the edge of the chisel. This new vicious discovery would corrupt the world of art. No, I shall never confide the secret to anyone, he said slowly. It would be hard to find anyone less informed about such phenomena than myself. But of course I had heard of mineral springs so saturated with silica that the leaves and twigs which fell into them were turned to stone after a time. I dimly comprehended the process. How the silica replaced the vegetable matter, atom by atom, and the result was a duplicate of the object in stone. This, I confess, had never interested me greatly, and as for the ancient fossils thus produced, they disgusted me. Boris, it appeared, feeling curiosity instead of repugnance, had investigated the subject and had accidentally stumbled on a solution which, attacking the immersed object with a ferocity unheard of, in a second did the work of years. This was all I could make out of the strange story he had just been telling me. He spoke again after a long silence. I am almost frightened when I think what I have found. Scientists would go mad over the discovery. It was so simple too. It discovered itself. When I think of that formula and that new element precipitated in metallic scales. What new element? Oh, I haven't thought of naming it, and I don't believe I ever shall. There are enough precious metals now in the world to cut throats over. I pricked up my ears. Have you struck gold, Boris? No better. But see here, Alec, he laughed, starting up. You and I have all we need in this world. Ah, how sinister and covetous you look already. I laughed too, and told him I was devoured by the desire for gold. And we had better talk of something else. So when Genevieve came in shortly after, we had turned our backs on alchemy. Genevieve was dressed in silvery gray from head to foot. The light glinted along the soft curves of her fair hair as she turned her cheek to Boris. Then she saw me and returned my greeting. She had never before failed to blow me a kiss from the tips of her white fingers, and I promptly complained of the omission. She smiled and held out her hand, which dropped almost before it had touched mine. Then she said, looking at Boris, "You must ask Alec to stay for luncheon." This also was something new. She had always asked me herself until today. I did, said Boris shortly. And you said yes, I hope. She turned to me with a charming, conventional smile. I might have been an acquaintance of the day before yesterday. I made her a low bow, je vais bien, madame, but refusing to take up our usual bantering tone, she murmured a hospitable commonplace and disappeared. Boris and I looked at one another. I had better go home, don't you think? I asked, hanged if I know. He replied frankly. While we were discussing the advisability of my departure, Genevieve reappeared in the doorway without her bonnet. She was wonderfully beautiful, but her color was too deep and her lovely eyes were too bright. She came straight up to me and took my arm. Luncheon is ready. Was I cross, Alec? I thought I had a headache, but I haven't. Come here, Boris. And she slipped her other arm through his. Alec knows that after you there is no one in the world whom I like as well as I like him, so if he sometimes feels snubbed it won't hurt him. Allah bonheur, I cried. Who says there are no thunderstorms in April? Are you ready? Chanted Boris. Ready. And arm in arm we raced into the dining room, scandalizing the servants. After all, we were not so much to blame. Genevieve was 18, Boris was 23, and I not quite 21. Some work that I was doing about this time on the decorations for Genevieve's boudoir kept me constantly at the quaint little hotel in the Rue Saint-Cecile. Boris and I in those days labored hard, but as we pleased, which was fitfully, and we all three, with Jack Scott, idled a great deal together. One quiet afternoon, I had been wandering alone over the house examining curios, prying into odd corners, bringing out sweetmeats and cigars from strange hiding places, and at last I stopped in the bathing room. Boris, all over clay, stood there washing his hands. The room was built of rose-colored marble excepting the floor, which was tessellated in rose and gray. In the center was a square pool sunken below the surface of the floor. Steps led down into it. Sculptured pillars supported a frescoed ceiling. A delicious marble cupid appeared to have just alighted on his pedestal at the upper end of the room. The whole interior was Boris' work and mine. Boris, in his working clothes of white canvas, scraped the traces of clay and red modeling wax from his handsome hands and coquetted over his shoulder with the cupid. I see you, he insisted. Don't try to look the other way and pretend not to see me. You know who made you, little humbug. It was always my role to interpret Cupid's sentiments in these conversations, and when my turn came I responded in such a manner that Boris seized my arm and dragged me toward the pool, declaring he would duck me. Next instant he dropped my arm and turned pale. Good God! He said, I forgot the pool is full of the solution. I shivered a little and dryly advised him to remember better where he had stored the precious liquid. In heaven's name, why do you keep a small lake of that gruesome stuff here of all places? I asked. I want to experiment on something large, he replied. On me, for instance, that came too close for jesting. But I do want to watch the action of that solution on a more highly organized living body. There is that big white rabbit, he said, following me into the studio. Jack Scott, wearing a paint-stained jacket, came wandering in, appropriated all the oriental sweetmeats he could lay his hands on, looted the cigarette case, and finally he and Boris disappeared together to visit the Luxembourg Gallery. Where a new silver bronze by Rodin and a landscape of Monet's were claiming the exclusive attention of artistic France. I went back to the studio and resumed my work. It was a Renaissance screen, which Boris wanted me to paint for Genevieve's boudoir. But the small boy who was unwillingly dawdling through a series of poses for it today refused all bribes to be good. He never rested an instant in the same position, and inside of 5 minutes I had as many different outlines of the little beggar. Are you posing, or are you executing a song and dance, my friend? I inquired. Whichever monsieur pleases, he replied with an angelic smile. Of course I dismissed him for the day, and of course I paid him for the full time, that being the way we spoil our models. After the young imp had gone, I made a few perfunctory daubs at my work, but was so thoroughly out of humor that it took me the rest of the afternoon to undo the damage I had done. So at last I scraped my palette, stuck my brushes in a bowl of black soap, and strolled into the smoking room.
I really believe that, excepting Genevieve's apartments, no room in the house was so free from the perfume of tobacco as this one. It was a queer chaos of odds and ends, hung with threadbare tapestry. A sweet-toned old spinet in good repair stood by the window. There were stands of weapons, some old and dull, others bright and modern, festoons of Indian and Turkish armor over the mantel, 2 or 3 good pictures, and a pipe rack. It was here that we used to come for new sensations in smoking. I doubt if any type of pipe ever existed which was not represented in that rack. When we had selected one, we immediately carried it somewhere else and smoked it. For the place was, on the whole, more gloomy and less inviting than any in the house. But this afternoon, the twilight was very soothing. The rugs and skins on the floor looked brown and soft and drowsy. The big couch was piled with cushions. I found my pipe and curled up there for an unaccustomed smoke in the smoking room. I had chosen one with a long flexible stem, and lighting it fell to dreaming. After a while it went out, but I did not stir. I dreamed on and presently fell asleep. I awoke to the saddest music I had ever heard. The room was quite dark. I had no idea what time it was. A ray of moonlight silvered one edge of the old spinet, and the polished wood seemed to exhale the sounds as perfume floats above a box of sandalwood. Someone rose in the darkness and came away weeping quietly, and I was fool enough to cry out Genevieve. She dropped at my voice, and I had time to curse myself while I made a light and tried to raise her from the floor. She shrank away with a murmur of pain. She was very quiet and asked for Boris. I carried her to the divan and went to look for him, but he was not in the house, and the servants were gone to bed.
Perplexed and anxious, I hurried back to Genevieve. She lay where I had left her, looking very white. "I can't find Boris nor any of the servants," I said. "I know," she answered faintly. "Boris is gone to it with Mr. Scott. I did not remember when I sent you for him just now. But he can't get back in that case before tomorrow afternoon. And are you hurt? Did I frighten you into falling? What an awful fool I am, but I was only half awake. Boris thought you had gone home before dinner. Do please excuse us for letting you stay here all this time. I have had a long nap. I left so sound that I did not know whether I was still asleep or not when I found myself staring at a figure that was moving toward me and called out your name. Have you been trying the old spinet? You must have played very softly. I would tell 1,000 more lies worse than that one to see the look of relief that came into her face. She smiled admirably and said in her natural voice, "Alec, I tripped on that wolf's head, and I think my ankle is sprained. Please call me and then go home." I did as she bade me and left her there when the maid came in. At noon next day, when I called, I found Boris walking restlessly about his studio. Genevieve is asleep just now. He told me the sprain is nothing, but why should she have such a high fever? The doctor can't account for it, or else he will not, he muttered. Genevieve has a fever? I asked. I should say so, and has actually been a little light-headed at intervals all night. The idea! Gay little Genevieve, without a care in the world, and she keeps saying her heart's broken, and she wants to die. My own heart stood still. Boris leaned against the door of his studio, looking down, his hands in his pockets, his kind keen eyes clouded, a new line of trouble drawn over them at good mark. That made the smile. The mate had orders to summon him the instant Genevieve opened her eyes. We waited and waited, and Boris, growing restless, wandered about, fussing with modelling wax and red clay. Suddenly he started for the next room. "Come and see my rose-colored bath full of death," he cried. "Is it death?" I asked. To humor his mood, "You are not prepared to call it life, I suppose." He answered, as he spoke, he plucked a solitary goldfish squirming and twisting out of its globe. "We'll send this one after the other, wherever that is," he said. There was feverish excitement in his voice. A dull weight of fever lay on my limbs and on my brain as I followed him to the fair crystal pool with its pink-tinted sides. And he dropped the creature in. Falling, its scales flashed with a hot orange gleam in its angry twistings and contortions. The moment it struck the liquid, it became rigid and sank heavily to the bottom. Then came the milky foam, the splendid hues radiating on the surface, and then the shaft of pure serene light broke through from seemingly infinite depths. Boris plunged in his hand and drew out an exquisite marble thing. Blue-veined, rose-tinted, and glistening with opalescent drops. Child's play, he muttered, and looked warily, longingly at me, as if I could answer such questions. But Jack Scott came in and entered into the game, as he called it, with order.
Nothing would do but to try the experiment on the white rabbit then and there. I was willing that Boris should find distraction from his cares, but I hated to see the life go out of a warm, living creature, and I declined to be present. Picking up a book at random, I sat down in the studio to read. Alas, I had found The King in Yellow. After a few moments, which seemed ages, I was putting it away with a nervous shudder when Boris and Jack came in bringing their marble rabbit. At the same time the bell rang above, and a cry came from the sick room. Boris was gone like a flash, and the next moment he called, "Jack, run for the doctor. Bring him back with you. Alec, come here." I went and stood at her door. A frightened maid came out in haste and ran away to fetch some remedy. Genevieve, sitting bolt upright, with crimson cheeks and glittering eyes, babbled incessantly and resisted Boris' gentle restraint. He called me to help. At my first touch she sighed and sank back, closing her eyes, and then as we still bent above her, she opened them again, looked straight into Boris' face, poor fever-crazed girl, and told her secret. At the same instant our 3 lives turned into new channels. The bond that held us so long together snapped forever, and a new bond was forged in its place, for she had spoken my name, and as the fever tortured her, her heart poured out its load of hidden sorrow.
Amazed and dumb I bowed my head, while my face burned like a live coal, and the blood surged in my ears, stupefying me with its clamor. Incapable of movement, incapable of speech, I listened to her feverish words in an agony of shame and sorrow.
Ho, ho, ho!
I could not silence her. I could not look at Boris. Then I felt an arm upon my shoulder, and Boris turned a bloodless face to mine.
Ho, ho, ho!
It is not your fault, Alec. Don't grieve so if she loves you. But he could not finish, and as the doctor stepped swiftly into the room,
Ho, ho, ho!
saying, "Ah, the fever," I seized Jack Scott and hurried him to the street, saying Boris would rather be alone. We crossed the street to our own apartments, and that night, seeing I was going to be ill too,
Ho, ho, ho!
he went for the doctor again. The last thing I recollect with any distinctness was hearing Jack say, "For heaven's sake, doctor, what ails him to wear a face like that?" And I thought of the king in yellow and the pallid mask.
Ho, ho, ho!
I was very ill, for the strain of 2 years which I had endured since that fatal May morning when Genevieve murmured, "I love you, but I think I love Boris best," told on me at last. I had never imagined that it could become more than I could endure. Outwardly tranquil, I had deceived myself. Although the inward battle raged night after night, and I, lying alone in my room, cursed myself for rebellious thoughts unloyal to Boris and unworthy of Genevieve, the morning always brought relief. And I returned to Genevieve and to my dear Boris with a heart washed clean by the tempests of the night. Never in word or deed or thought while with them had I betrayed my sorrow even to myself.
The mask of self-deception was no longer a mask for me, it was a part of me. Night lifted it, laying bare the stifled truth below. But there was no one to see except myself, and when the day broke the mask fell back again of its own accord.
These thoughts passed through my troubled mind as I lay sick, but they were hopelessly entangled with visions of white creatures, heavy as stone, crawling about in Boris Basin, of the wolf's head on the rug, foaming and snapping at Genevieve, who lay smiling beside it, I thought. Two, of the king in yellow wrapped in the fantastic colors of his tattered mantle, and that bitter cry of Casilda, "Not upon us, O king, not upon us!" Feverishly I struggled to put it from me. But I saw the lake of Holly, thin and blank, without a ripple or wind to stir it, and I saw the towers of Carcosa behind the moon. Aldebaran, the Hyades, Ailer, Hastur glided through the cloud drifts which fluttered and flapped as they passed like the scalloped tatters of the king in yellow. Among all these, one sane thought persisted. It never wavered, no matter what else was going on in my disordered mind, that my chief reason for existing was to meet some requirement of Boris and Genevieve. What this obligation was, its nature, was never clear. Sometimes it seemed to be protection, sometimes support through a great crisis. Whatever it seemed to be for the time, its weight rested only on me, and I was never so ill or so weak that I did not respond with my whole soul. There were always crowds of faces about me, mostly strange, but a few I recognized, Boris among them. Afterward they told me that this could not have been, but I know that once at least he bent over me. It was only a touch, a faint echo of his voice. Then the clouds settled back on my senses. and I lost him, but he did stand there and bend over me once at least. At last, one morning I awoke to find the sunlight falling across my bed and Jack Scott reading beside me. I had not strength enough to speak aloud, neither could I think, much less remember. But I could smile feebly as Jack's eye met mine, and when he jumped up and asked eagerly if I wanted anything, I could whisper, "Yes, Boris." Jack moved to the head of my bed and leaned down to arrange my pillow. I did not see his face, but he answered heartily, "You must wait, Alec. You are too weak to see even Boris." I waited and I grew strong. In a few days I was able to see whom I would, but meanwhile I had thought and remembered. From the moment when all the past grew clear again in my mind, I never doubted what I should do when the time came, and I felt sure that Boris would have resolved upon the same course so far as he was concerned as for what pertained to me alone. I knew he would see that also as I did. I no longer asked for anyone. I never inquired why no message came from them. Why during the week I lay there, waiting and growing stronger, I never heard their name spoken, preoccupied with my own searchings for the right way. And with my feeble but determined fight against despair, I simply acquiesced in Jack's reticence, taking for granted that he was afraid to speak of them, lest I should turn unruly and insist on seeing them. Meanwhile, I said over and over to myself, how would it be when life began again for us all? We would take up our relations exactly as they were before Genevieve fell ill. Boris and I would look into each other's eyes, and there would be neither rancor nor cowardice nor mistrust in that glance. I would be with them again for a little while in the dear intimacy of their home, and then, without pretext or explanation, I would disappear from their lives forever. Boris would know. Genevieve's only comfort was that she would never know. It seemed, as I thought it over, that I had found the meaning of that sense of obligation which had persisted all through my delirium, and the only possible answer to it. So, when I was quite ready, I beckoned Jack to me one day and said, "Jack, I want Boris at once." And take my dearest greeting to Genevieve. When at last he made me understand that they were both dead, I fell into a wild rage that tore all my little convalescent strength to atoms. I raved and cursed myself into a relapse, from which I crawled forth some weeks afterward, a boy of 21 who believed that his youth was gone forever. I seemed to be past the capability of further suffering, and one day when Jack handed me a letter and the keys to Boris' house, I took them without a tremor and asked him to tell me all. It was cruel of me to ask him, but there was no help for it, and he leaned wearily on his thin hands to reopen the wound which could never entirely heal. He began very quietly, "Alec, unless you have a clue that I know nothing about, you will not be able to explain any more than I what has happened. I suspect that you would rather not hear these details, but you must learn them, else I would spare you the relation. God knows I wish I could be spared the telling. I shall use few words. That day when I left you in the doctor's care and came back to Boris, I found him working on the fates. Genevieve, he said, was sleeping under the influence of drugs. She had been quite out of her mind, he said. He kept on working, not talking anymore, and I watched him. Before long, I saw that the third figure of the group, the one looking straight ahead, out over the world, bore his face. Not as you ever saw it, but as it looked then and to the end. This is one thing for which I should like to find an explanation, but I never shall. Well, he worked and I watched him in silence, and we went on that way until nearly midnight.
Okay, that sucked. That sucked. I'm done. We're done. We're done. That sucked. I think that was a grand majority of the story. I zoned out after paragraph 2. Like I couldn't pay attention at all. Everybody here, could you please vote in server announcements? I put up 2 polls. Please vote. I think I think that sucked. But I'm willing to read again because yeah, it was funny for the first 5 minutes and then it stopped being funny. So I'm done for the time being. Vote on the polls, server announcements. Otherwise, I think we're done here. So goodbye and good night.